Good afternoon, everyone. It's a really great pleasure here to be here to talk about open access books, which is a subject very dear to my heart, and to do it in such fine company. So thank you, Elko and Francis, for some wonderful presentations, which are really starting to shed light on the universe of open access books. And I think it's really great that we've reached this point where we are able to sort of start talking about where we've got to in open access books and how we get to the next stage. So I'm going to share some findings from a research project that we conducted at Springer Nature over the last year. And I might point out that I also head up our open access books division, so I'm not just sort of parachuted in from the policy department. I'll just start very quickly by talking a little bit about how our open access books program works. I won't spend too much time on this. This is not an advert for the Springer Nature open access book program, but just to provide some context for the project that we did. So we publish open access books under both the Springer Open and the Palgrave Macmillan imprints. So those two imprints were brought together by the merger of Springer and Macmillan in 2015. And as it so happened, both publishers had been early movers in open access books. So Springer published its first open access book back in 2012, and Palgrave Macmillan in 2013. And so that means that we've now got a few years of data telling us about those books. We publish across a wide range of subject areas, so everything from the humanities and social sciences through to the STEM subjects. And just to address a question that was asked earlier about subject areas, we're finding that we see in our humanities and social science programs, in our economics and business programs, and also in engineering and physical science programs, they're seeing the highest growth in open access books, the highest proportion of our programs published open access. Interestingly, we're seeing slightly lower growth or lower proportions of our programs publishing open access books in the life sciences. We publish open access books across a wide range of formats. We use CC BY as our default license. We permit other licenses when authors request them because they have a particular wish to protect aspects of their intellectual property. We are a publisher that has focused on trying to make open access books as open as possible. We make all of our electronic versions open access, the PDF, the EPUB, the HTML, and in most cases also in Amazon format. There's print on demand, and we've published 450 open access books so far. So, I mean, the numbers are still small overall, but we're starting to make some inroads. Anyway, our commissioning editors are going out there, they're talking to our authors, they're saying, hey, why don't you publish your book open access? It's really something you should think about. And a question that we get a lot from authors is, well, what's in it for me? Does it make a difference? Why should I publish my book open access? And we can talk about all of the kind of the sort of wider ethical benefits and reasons that you should try and make your scholarship widely available. But sometimes our authors want a little bit more, and this made us curious. What actual benefit do you get from publishing an open access book? Is there an open access effect? So we devised a little study to look at this. And one feature of being, in some senses, a traditional publisher, or certainly a publisher which publishes both open access books and non-open access books, is that we're able to make this comparison with books that have been treated to exactly the same publishing process, commissioned by the same editors for the same lists, published on the same publishing platform, and given the same marketing, promotional opportunities. So we have the opportunity to look at how open access might make a difference. And so we decided we'd look at some quantitative measures. So in particular, does open access increase usage, and how much? Does it increase citations? And what about online mentions? And here I'm talking about references on social media, but also in news outlets and in, for example, policy documents. Alongside this, we conducted a series of author and funder interviews. And our thought here was really that the metrics are interesting and the metrics are important, but also, especially for an area which is so tied to the humanities and social sciences, we didn't want to focus purely on the quantitative. We wanted to have some understanding of what authors' experiences were. Why did they choose to publish open access? What had that experience been like? And did they have any sense of what the effect, if any, of publishing open access had been on their books? All right, so what do we find out? So there's quite a lot going on in this chart, so I'll try and take you through it. We looked at average downloads over time per book, and we compared the downloads from the point of the book's publication, and we looked at chapter downloads because that's what we measure in our counter data. So what you can see here is the turquoise is the open access books, and the darker blue is the non-open access books, with the bar chart showing the average downloads at a particular point in time, and then we've also got the cumulative. So we found that on average, there are just under 30,000 chapter downloads per open access book within the first year of publication. And that's 7 times more than the average non-open access book. And you can see there's a really big spike in that first year. In fact, after 6 months, open access books, our open access books, had received 15 times the usage of an average non-open access book at that point in its publication history. You can see that OA books, the advantage peaks in the first year, but that they can continue to experience higher usage than non-open access books over the first 4 years of their life, and that's the data period that we have to look at. You continue to see steady usage for the non-open access books over this time. I'd note this is just downloads from our Springerlink platform. It doesn't include anything from the third-party sites. So our books are variously on OAPN, they're on Google Books, they're on Amazon, they're in NCBI Bookshelf. So we haven't included any of this here, so it's quite possible that we're actually underrepresenting the usage of OA books. And of course, it doesn't capture any usage from authors who may have shared it on their own personal websites or by email. Moving on then to look at citations. So here again, you can see that the turquoise is the open access books and the darker blue is the non-OA books. For this, we used Bookmetrics, which is a Springer Nature service which gives authors an overview of the reach, the usage, and the readership of their book. And for this part of the analysis, we were only able to make comparisons between OA and non-OA titles published in the same year. So we don't have the month-level granularity that we had for the downloads analysis, and this may account for some of the lumpiness in the data that we're seeing here. So here you can see that citations are on average 50% higher for open access books compared to non-open access books over a 4-year period. So over that period, an open access book is cited on average 12 times within the first 4 years of its life, whereas a non-OA book would be cited on average 8 times. We'd note, of course, that while citations appear to peak in the 4th year, this is a pretty short period to be looking at citation trends for books, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. So I think this has definitely got a kind of big TBC marked on it. We'd really like to see what happens to this in future years. Again, you can see that the increase in citations for OA books is seen, or the advantage in citations is seen right from the beginning of the book's life. So in every year, OA books are getting more citations than non-open access books. It's a bit lumpier for OA books. That might, again, it might be to do with the use of year metrics. It might be to do with the fact that there are slightly fewer books in the survey compared to the non-OA books, because we see a steadier rate of growth for citations for the non-OA books. We were also interested to see whether there was any correlation between downloads and citations. And at this point, it's not clear to us that there is. So you can see here, again, the turquoise showing the open access books and the dark blue showing the non-OA, and the downloads in the solid line, the citations in the dotted line. So here again, you can see, and this is not cumulative, so just showing each year as it comes, we've got this huge leap in usage in the first year for an open access book, but we're not seeing a kind of corresponding, obvious, sharp rise in citations for OA books. I think it is very hard to tell with only 4 years of data, and I think we'll continue to look at this to see whether those trends play out over time. But you can obviously see the effect of more usage early on, and then citations occurring, as you might expect, later on as readers take time to digest, perform further research, publish their own books in citations. Finally, in the quantitative analysis, we looked at online mentions. So again, this is references in policy documents, in news, and in social media. And here we saw a huge advantage for open access books. So in the first 3 years after publication, OA books are mentioned an average of 30 times, and that's 10 times more than a non-OA book. And as you can see, this is hugely front-loaded into the first year. And we haven't looked at the breakdown of this at this point, so it's not clear whether this is from social media or whether it's from news or policy, but perhaps more to come in future on this. One thing that's particularly interesting here, I think, or one thing that's sort of interesting to think about is, why is this happening? Is this because people are choosing to share open access books more because they can access and read them? Or is it in fact that perhaps authors and funders who engage with open access are more engaged in general with the publication process and more likely to share their books, perhaps more likely to be engaged in policy circles? And I guess across all of this, I'd add a big stamp to say correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. We've established that OA books are performing better, and at this point I think there's more work to be done to understand exactly why that is. Moving on then to some of our interviews with authors and funders. And so to be clear, these were interviews with authors and funders who had published open access with us, who had funded our open access books. So this is not a neutral survey, this is very much trying to take the temperature of those who have engaged with open access books at a relatively early stage. So we found that Springer Nature authors choosing to publish open access books are primarily motivated by the desire for their books to reach the widest possible audience. So bringing the content to the people who should be reading it. They wanted them to be shared and cited more than non-open access books. They value the ease of sharing books through direct links that OA enables. And they particularly value that in regions where readers might not be able to afford a traditional print edition of the book. We heard a lot about ethical motivations. So, for example, pointing out that with open science, it supports research replication, the verification and falsification of research findings. And I guess it's worth noting that we have mostly been talking about open access books in the context of the humanities and social sciences, but we're also publishing research in science subject as well, and in social science, which might have more quantitative research methods, and that many of the benefits that we're seeing for open access in journals and for open science in journals carry across to books. And in fact, we heard that from funders as well. From the funders who are engaged with open access, they told us, well, we really don't see why we should treat them any differently. You know, we're publishing critical research in all of these different formats, and we don't want to distinguish between a book and a journal to say one is more important than the other in terms of making it open access. We heard also many arguments that we hear on the journal side, for example, these ethical, political motivations saying that if research is publicly funded, then the public has the right to access these results. There were a few other reasons. Authors publishing books on open science itself, or in areas like international development in low-income countries, believe that such topics demand to be published open access. Some of our authors told us that they were attracted by the fact that the print edition was cheaper when we published it open access. And of course, there was an expectation that there will be higher citations and downloads. Moving on then to experiences of publishing open access. One thing that really struck us here was a lack of knowledge from authors and funders about the specific benefits of publishing books open access. No one really felt informed about what the implications of publishing a book open access were, even if they thought it was really important to do it. They struggled to quantify exactly what that would mean. We were told again and again, well, we haven't really done any analysis, we haven't looked at this, and we were told this by both authors and funders, including kind of major funders that have put a lot of money into open access books. Interviewed authors sometimes did acknowledge that there were large numbers of downloads. Perhaps they'd seen the book metrics report on our platform, and they said, well, yeah, it's great that my book got a lot of downloads, but actually I'm not sure you can attribute this just to the fact that it's open access. I mean, the author's reputation might come into play, or the book's topic was a particularly timely one, or, well, we, the authors, did some additional marketing activities, and that might have had an influence on the overall usage and impact of open access books. And they're right in the sense that, as I said, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, and there could be some self-selection bias in those authors that choose to publish open access, which is something that will be interesting to look into further. We'd been really interested to know if authors might find new collaborations, new opportunities arising as a result of publishing their books open access. And I guess it might be a little early to tell this, given that the earliest open access books were published 4 or 5 years ago. But we did find that neither group was generally aware, neither funders nor authors were generally aware of any new collaborations or opportunities having arisen directly as a result of their having published or funded open access books. But I would say, again, there was a reluctance to attribute things directly to the fact that things were open access. Perhaps collaborations had arisen, but it was felt that it was due to the subject of the book. So I think there's a lot more to tease out here. One thing that was very encouraging was how positive our authors and our funders were about the experiences of publishing open access. We were told again and again, I think this is the way of the future. I wish there were a way for everyone to publish open access. I want to sort of tell people what a great experience this has been and how great it is to just be able to share my book with anyone who might want to read it. So, what have we learned? The data did match our expectations. We did find an OA effect. We found 7 times more downloads in the first year alone. We found 50% more citations than non-OA books on average. And we found 10 times more online mentions. But I think the thing that really struck us about this was that we didn't realize the extent to which authors and funders feel uninformed about the effects of open access. And this led us to think about what more we need to do in this area. I think one really big area here is looking at metrics across the industry. How do we collect them? How do we report them? How do we share them? And how do we standardize them? And this really hit home for us because we actually had to exclude several of the Palgrave open access books from our study because they were published before the merger. Palgrave used a different way of collecting usage data. It measured it by book. And we had no way of aligning that with the data that we had for the Springer books and for any Palgrave data after 2016. How can we improve communication? How can we better support authors and funders in understanding the impact of open access books? If we want to make an argument for open access, if we want to say that this is the future, we should be moving towards it, we need to be giving people tangible reasons for moving towards it. And we also started thinking about discovery routes. I've talked about how we place open access books on a variety of different third-party platforms, but I think there's a lot more to do in terms of collaborating with libraries and with aggregators, and I think Francis's slide demonstrates this very well. We might be making the books OA. You might find them via a Google search, but are they actually ending up in your library's catalog? Are they forming part of that workflow and that discovery workflow? Are we really engaging with libraries to do the best we can for these books? And it really strikes me that we've seen this OA effect, but I think there's so much more potential for open access books. It's just that we're all still in a process of working on these workflows, on these systems that support that ecosystem. I wanted to finish by thinking about how we could extend this analysis and also to put out a call to those who are publishing open access books, to those who are engaged in it, to sort of a rallying call to say, what more can we all do? I think we'd like to be able to repeat the same analysis over a longer period, see how those trends pan out, both particularly to look at citations over a longer period, but also because we've been increasing the number of books year on year, so our data will improve year on year. We'd like to try and tease out some of the causation between this OA advantage and sort of what the book's performance. We would like to look at geolocation of usage, and again, Knowledge Unlatched has looked at this. Where are the referrals coming from? We need to find some way to understand how downloads from third-party hosting platforms interact with downloads from our own, and this goes back to my earlier point about trying to standardize the ways in which we report and share data. We'd like to look at citations and online mentions by subject area. This is something that we did for the downloads, and I haven't included it here so as not to have a kind of complete data overload, but you can find it in the report. And think about other ways of measuring impact so we don't get too hung up on these quantitative measures, or don't think only about these quantitative measures. So you can download the full report, you can find the methodology there and the definitions of terms, and also the subject analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ros. And again, 2 questions. Are there questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. John Sack, Highwire Press. I really appreciate your comment toward the end about the possibility of selection bias. When we did a study in journals about OA downloads and OA citations, we found that when you eliminated selection bias by doing randomized trials, essentially randomly assigning articles to open or not open, the citation advantage seemed to disappear, but the download advantage was clearly evident. Now, what's interesting is your download advantage is much larger than we saw with journal articles, so that's really an impressive number. I hope you can, if you find a way to do either an RCT or something. It's a lot harder to do in books than it is in journal articles, I think, so I'd be impressed if you managed to do that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Another question? Thank you very much, Ros. This was fine. I thank all the speakers and I thank the auditorium for the discussion. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.